gives me very great pleasure to introduce Liz Murphy and Emmanuela Yogolelo. They're going to take it in turns, sharing the platform to talk about the work that they've been doing and which Liz leads as Artistic Director of Musicians Without Borders here in the UK. And Liz has been a very long-standing colleague of mine, and even longer standing of Nigel as first pupil and then as fellow worker in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Emmanuela hails from the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's not been able to be there since 2003, but her background is in internal and international law, and is now the lead singer of the wonderful music project, the Beating Wing Orchestra. But I'll hand over now to Liz.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ian. Thank you so much for inviting us to come and talk to you today. I want to look at connecting some of the themes and topics from yesterday, looking at music and how music can be used as a positive, transformative change to people who have been affected by trauma, but also within our work of the artistic responses and the creative works of people who we work with both in the UK and across the world. So just to introduce myself a little bit about my background, as Ian says, I was a student at Edinburgh University under Nigel Osborne. I wasn't one of those disciplined, committed students who could spend 8 hours a day on my own playing my fiddle and singing. So when I finished with my music degree, the world was opened up to me, and I didn't really know where to go with it. A job opportunity came up to work out in Bosnia, running a schools project with local musicians connected to a music therapy department and also an academic school there. So I went out with my fiddle and my voice and my passion, and it's basically been a huge transformative part of my life. The thing that really stuck with me as soon as I arrived was the unbelievably awful atrocities that had happened within these communities there, and how it had affected not just the buildings and the bridges and everything, but actually the whole community had been traumatised. We were working with young children, with children of all ages. The team that I was working with are people of my age in their early 20s who'd either been child soldiers, who'd been in prison as conscientious objectors, who'd been in concentration camps. And for me, at such a young age, this was a really shocking thing to kind of start thinking about and imagining what had happened to the people that I was then working with on a daily basis. So I became very interested and curious about how the people that I was working with, how they had actually managed to survive, not just physically but mentally, through the experiences that they'd had of these 2 different wars over a 5-year period. There was one particularly amazing, inspiring musician who I met out there, who was a Sevdah musician. Sevdah's the traditional Bosnian folk music that has influences from Islam, from klezmer, Jewish music, gypsy music, as well as Christian or Orthodox communities. And I was chatting to him one day, and it was very casual, we were having a drink in the pub. And he just said, one day he got so bored of fighting, he couldn't be bothered anymore, was how he put it. He couldn't stand it. And so he just decided he was going to trade his gun for a guitar. And he just then used to sit and risk his life on the front line to play music. And that was his kind of choice. Whether it was a protest or whether he was just bored of fighting, I'm sure there was more to it than that. But this, for me, was a really strong, amazing, individual kind of act of how music can become more important than fighting a so-called enemy that you've been put into a situation to do. So I lived out in Bosnia for a couple of years, came back, did a few other jobs working with refugees and asylum seekers, and I was very, very keen to continue with the work using music as a powerful, transformative way of reducing trauma within different communities in Bosnia, but also with refugees and asylum seekers who come from conflict zones all over the world to this country. I met with Ian, and Ian and I had worked out in Bosnia. Ian was running a charity out there, and so I asked him, what do you do? How do you set up a charity? I have no idea, but that's what I want to do. Ian introduced me to an amazing lady who's based in the Netherlands called Laura Hassler. And she founded the organisation Musicians Without Borders in response to the Kosovo War. A group of musicians had gone out there just to see what they could do in the immediate aftermath of the Kosovo War to use music in a positive way to start rebuilding communities. Music was found to be an incredibly powerful thing that there was a huge need for, the way that music was used as well, the therapeutic way that music was used. And from that, an organisation developed. So Musicians Without Borders International now, we have a rock school in Mitrovica in Kosovo. We have training projects, samba projects, rap projects in Palestine. We have a recent rock school in Mostar, engaging young people from both sides of the city, from different ethnicities, and Gypsy Roma children as well. We also have projects in Rwanda, working with youth with HIV, using music to, I'll talk about the methodology of Musicians Without Borders. We see it as 3 stages of how music can be used in a transformative way. So the first stage is the immediate aftermath of war and the immediate trauma. So the very sort of transformative power of music through either singing or just gentle breathing exercises, through movement, through body percussion, through changing the heart rate, through changing the breathing, through changing the hormone levels. That music can have a very positive effect in the immediate aftermath of trauma, in reducing the stress. A lot of feedback we get from our projects is for that moment or the hour or 2 hours that people have been doing the music, they're almost in a different zone. They're not thinking about problems, not thinking about the past. The next stage that we look at is actually how we can bring communities together in a positive way. So in Kosovo, there was an amazing story last year where we had bands of we have 2 schools there because the children can't actually meet in their city. So we have a rock school with the Albanians and a rock school with the Serbs, and we take them to another country for them to meet and just form bands together. And there's a story last year where Musicians Without Borders staff member had seen a group of young people with their guitars and backpacks walking to cross the bridge in the city. And this is never done. This is very dangerous. It's not something that happens. So the Musicians Without Borders staff went up to the group and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, we want to go and jam with our mates. We met in the summer school, we've been communicating by Facebook and pirate radio, and we just want to get together. We want to be normal kids and we want to play music. And again, this is one of these instances of a really tiny event that the way it was kind of expressed by those young people was so casual, but in itself it's a huge, huge thing that the wanting to play music becomes more important than the divides, than the history, than the past, and what's happening. And it's a really positive way forward. The third phase that the Musicians Without Borders looks at is around non-violence. And this is particularly, we work with an amazing organisation in Palestine called Holy Land Trust, and they specialise in non-violence training. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come to the conference yesterday, but I'm sure that there was a lot of talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and how sometimes the violence that either by perpetrator or by victim or by observer or by witness affects the human beings in such a way that then it can increase the violence either within the home or within the communities. And within Palestine, we work with groups to look at actually what is violence. Is domestic violence ever acceptable? Is it acceptable to hit children? And a lot of this habitual thinking is not questioned, and it's just part of this stress that's in the body that then spills out into the rest of the community. So for us, that's a really important part of our work. I'm going to hand over to Emmanuela in a minute. But I set up Musicians Without Borders in the UK 3 years ago. Majority of the work we've been doing here is with refugee and asylum seeking communities and with torture survivors as well. One particular project we have is called Stone Flowers. We're going to show you the DVD at the end, which is where the quote comes from here. This is a severely traumatised group of people from all over, from Iran, from Sri Lanka, from Cameroon, from Iraq, from we have a lot of Kurdish people. And it was set up in response to the use of music as a actual form of torture in Guantanamo Bay. There was an article in Musicians Union magazine about this, and a colleague of ours, Adrian Jolly, was very, very upset about this, and so he approached Freedom from Torture, and we work with that group to use music as a positive way to support people who have been through these unbelievable experiences of